Today on the show, we have co-founder of Inferno VFX and a teacher, Mr. Dante Rinaldi. You're probably wondering why I am talking to somebody in the visual effects world as a music producer. Well, on top of the fact that I encompass a lot more than just music in my studio, I am a really huge fan of the visual effects arts, and I think there's a lot of parallels, which Dante and I go into. So without further ado, here is part one of my conversation with Dante Rinaldi. Mr. Dante Rinaldi, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Dan. It's great to be here. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks for coming on. So I have known you to be someone in a lot of different VFX. Your company, Inferno VFX, does a lot of different films, a lot of ones that people would know very, very well.
My wife and I, she's actually the co-owner of the company that we kind of branched out in, and we have a big love for visual effects. And just saying that term probably raises a couple of ears with your listeners because they're probably thinking, wait a minute, I thought this was an audio podcast, right?
While this is an audio podcast, there is merit to understanding the visual side of things, because the big thing that we are told as musicians these days, you want to be seen? Well, start a YouTube channel and learn how to make videos.
Mm-hmm.
So everything revolves around the visual. And at the end of the day,
it's a huge crossroads too right now. I mean, it's always been a big gray area between the visuals and even and we could talk about live music and going back in the day for bands and stuff. But
at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff is creative process.
Yeah, it really is a lot of the same stuff. And, before you hit that big red button, we had a great conversation. what were we talking about? Apple products and people shooting things on their phone and the world of microphones. A good friend of mine says half of what you see goes through your ears. And if your audio sucks, people are tuned out, and they got 5 seconds and they're gone.
Right. Right.
And rightly so. Who wants to hear bad audio?
Even if the visual is beautiful.
And, it's funny because, we were talking a little bit about audio and even our previous discussions a few weeks ago, we were talking about a lot of your listeners are probably really heavily into, the bands and the recording and, without the visual, if you think about it, a lot of it started, not to go off on a tangent, but the Beatles with their Shea Stadium concert, no one heard them, no one saw them, right? And the audio and the video hadn't caught up to that concert experience yet. Well, nowadays you wouldn't, think twice. Of course, we're going to hear the band, but back in the 60s, you couldn't even hear them because they had their own studio amps literally behind them on third base, right? With a couple of microphones hooked up to the PA system thinking this is going to work, and none of it worked. It's kind of funny that, if just 10 years later with bands like Queen and Pink Floyd and stuff like that, that experience completely went away. And now it's like we have to, what they say, entertain while you're being entertaining, It's kind of interesting that, I'm just kind of talking the visual effects world, the special effects world, the live view is really so closely tied to music now that it's almost inseparable.
Yeah. No, well, since you brought up the Beatles, it's a really funny thing that you mentioned, because one of the things that I'd heard, especially with the Beatles documentary now being out, is that they stopped touring because they could not hear themselves.
Sure. Right.
And as you said, you think about the 70s, the advent of good PA technology made it possible that, in theory, if they actually wanted to tour again or, had the gumption to do a one-off show or something, they could have. And something that I've always wanted to ask a Ringo Starr or a Paul McCartney would have been, had Lennon not died, it would, in the early 80s, with the advent of the technology, both in the studio and in live audio settings, would you have considered it?
Yeah. And Paul went on, they all went on to do a little bit of, not say a little bit, but a lot of live stuff, but just not together.
Right.
Right. But it's interesting that, the advent of these humongous rigs, stuff like, The Who, you could hear for 20 miles away, the Who concerts. And a lot of that is a reaction to the fact that we lost the Beatles. They said, screw it. We can't hear ourselves, so then the audience can't hear us. We'll just make these little movies, little mini movies like of Strawberry Fields and things like that, and let that go tour for us, right? And then we don't have to go do it because it's a waste of our time, and we'll just play in the studio.
Right.
But you can almost say, okay, so we lost the Beatles live, but we gained maybe the Sgt. Pepper's and the White Album and all that great studio experimentation because they weren't on the road 9, 10, 11 months out of the year, right?
No, they quite frankly, the fact that they could not hear themselves was probably a godsend for the music of the Beatles. And honestly,
innovation, yeah.
Quite frankly, I don't think the audio, the recording industry would look the way it does now had they not stopped touring.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, their experimentation, which was later, I think, reflected in bands like, Queen with the massive overdubs and playing around with all kinds of soundscapes and microphone placements and all kinds of stuff. They had that opportunity to just play as opposed to let's go sell these T-shirts and be on the road for 11 months out of the year, right? Because that's what's required of us. Which is really kind of interesting. But, going back to the visual effects part, that's, I think, where it kind of was born. If you just go a little bit further, a few years later, now you have, say, Pink Floyd, and they're putting together maybe their big tour, The Wall, back in 79 and 80, and they're literally building the wall as they're playing, right? I mean, so now you're talking special effects, visual effects, the wall explodes. In 75 with Bohemian Rhapsody, they couldn't reproduce that sound live, right? And without a huge audio video show that, they just ran off the stage when it was time for the operatic section because they know they couldn't reproduce that. It would sound ridiculous, right? With 4 guys on stage. And they refused to do backing vocals. So they ran off the stage and they said, let's let the lights and the movie and the crowd take care of the rest. And that kind of was the first kind of, in my opinion, like the first kind of marriage of live visual special effects and rock that now is being seen literally everywhere. I mean, U2 is just over the top, right? Even some of the stuff that you're seeing, like Billie Eilish with the interactive spider in her concerts and Gold Dust Woman with Fleetwood Mac, it knows where the singers are. The visual effects are like encompassing you, not even to mention the AR, the VR stuff that's kind of happening now.
Right.
That's coming forward. I think a lot of your listeners who say, I'm going to put on a show and it may not be as big as a U2 concert, but I think a lot of people actually just, you're at a smaller venue, maybe 1,000-seat studio. You need something back there. You need something around you more than just the typical sheet that was big back in the 60s, right? With the spray painted name of the band.
Fascinating thing about a lot of the visual effects. Both of my parents worked for Bill Graham, and Bill Graham, I don't know if you know the history of Bill Graham or Bill Graham Presents, but one of the subsidiary companies of Bill Graham Presents was a design shop called FM Productions. And this is in the era of, like you said, when a lot of bands really didn't do anything. The thing that would happen often was a banner, either screen printed or painted with the band's name and or logo.
Yeah, and then the lights will do the rest in the dark.
Right, and lighting is a visual effect. That's an incredibly important piece of live music, even now with the advent of video screens and a lot of visual effects and other things of that nature. But one of the interesting things that I think we can attest to Bill Graham is the fact that Bill had a set design shop for not plays, not musicals, not anything like that. No, they were set design shop for live music. Yeah. And they built visual pieces and stage pieces for the bands, touring bands that came in, and now look what every band in the world does. They bring forth a giant set design, you know.
Yeah.
In some cases really pointless looking but it's still, you know, whether or not you think it's pointless or not,
Gratuitous,
it's
over the top. Yeah. That's a super good point, because like someone might say, I love U2's music. I don't care whether there's a 20-foot mirror ball. You know, and you know what we're seeing now, and I'd love to get your take on this, because as musicians and sound people, the most important thing to you all is how this experience sounds, right? And it's almost like, just because we can do something, should we, you know, the old Jurassic Park kind of a feel. People are saying now, let's have these concerts, these live concerts, where people are looking at AR experiences on their phone while the show's going on. People are saying, put iPod, you know, in your ear so you can hear different things, you know, sonically around you while the concert's going on. And I'm looking at this kind of direction that, you know, the tech people want to go and the theater people want to go. And I just want to say, wait a minute, what do the musicians think of this nonsense where you're almost being tuned out because of a show on your phone during a show?
Well,
you know?
and I mean, there's even times that go as far as say, you know, to hell with the PA.
Mhm.
We're going to stream the entire concert to an app on your phone, put your AirPods in your ears, tune into the app on your phone, and that's how you'll hear the concert.
And if you're looking at the concert through your phone because there's some AR nonsense going on, you know, some little bouncing character on stage that's not really there, it's in the CG world, do you even need to be there at all? And that's kind of sad if you have to ask that question, you know. So I'm saying that, you know, the emerging tech of the live concerts are astounding, but kind of a double-edged sword. Is it going to be worse? Are we getting to the point where it's almost going to be like the Beatles saying, no one's looking at us. They're looking at their phones and they're listening to their Bose headphones. I'm out of here. This could be a movie behind me, you know?
Right.
It's kind of tricky, you know? I mean, just looking at some shots from Muse, they hire a 3D company, a 3D visual effects company, to put amazing visuals behind them. And at some point you're going to say, oh, was Muse there? I was looking at the really cool flaming skeleton that was going on during my favorite song, you know? It seems like a double-edged sword. It seems tricky.